Well, I think it is safe to say that we have a contender for one of the worst movies of 2021. Hello there, I'm Anaji, and this is FMV Reviews. So, Spiral. Spiral is the latest installment in the what I thought was dead Saw franchise, but they brought it back. And in this movie, you follow a detective who is investigating a series of murders that highly mimic the Jigsaw killer's very elaborate Rube Goldberg esque murder traps. And you watch as he investigates what's going on. I think the only element added to this plot that's even kind of interesting is that he is a cop who's being ostracized by his police department because he is a cop who has, turned in a corrupt cop, and the rest of the cops didn't like that. That's funny to think about, cops not liking, justice. But yeah, let's get into it. So the Saw franchise has been a really interesting one to me. I've been a fan of it ever since it first came out. But I'm not gonna lie in saying that I think after Saw 3, they should have stopped. They should have stopped, because the first three Saws, even though Saw has, it's been very tied into the sort of torture porn-esque genre that was happening in the mid 2000s. I don't think it's fair to categorize at least the first three Saws that way. The first three Saws have a really solid foundation of thematic character stuff going on, where a lot of the traps are very tied to whoever the protagonist is or whoever the person is stuck inside of the trap. And I think one of the other appeals of Saw was that it kind of had a twisty story, and it had a killer who had an interesting sort of philosophical view on what he was doing. But I would say after Saw 3, like what happens with a lot of horror franchises once they become sequelized a lot, is that a lot of those deeper elements sort of sink down to the bottom, and the more grimy, eye-catching elements are brought to the top. Like in the Saw franchise, this sort of twisting of the plot became so elaborate that it became hard to believe, and a more emphasis was put on the traps and the gore without necessarily adding the thematic stuff that really made it elevate above just being like what it was categorized as, torture porn. So I'm gonna say right now, I don't have anything good to say about this movie. This is a rare movie where there's nothing redeeming about it. So I just have a list of things that I'm just gonna go through. This plot is bad. This plot is just one big cliche filled with a bunch of other cliches. If you've seen any of these sort of kind of serial killer Seven-esque movies, you can probably guess a lot of the things that are going to happen in it. I mean, literally, I guessed what the big twist was maybe 20 minutes before it happened. Not a good sign. There seems to be elements of whoever wrote this screenwriting, they seem to be a fan of Quentin Tarantino. There's a sequence that happens early in the movie that feels so Tarantino-esque that it was almost funny to watch, because it just was so blatant of it trying to be Tarantino that I almost couldn't believe it. Yeah, I just really couldn't believe it. This movie looks terrible. This movie looks so cheap. This movie looks like it feels like an SNL digital short where Chris Rock was the guest star, and they wanted to do the comedy of, oh man, what if we had Chris Rock in one of these like serial killer movies? Except this movie's not trying to be jokey. It's trying to be serious, and the more serious it tries to be, the worse it comes off. I mean, the cinematography is really unmemorable. It's really bad. Like there's sequences in the movie where it's trying to do sequences that you've seen out of other serial killer movies that are supposed to be like really heavy and dark, and it just comes off as parody. But the part that's bad is I don't think they're trying to do a parody of it. There are flashback sequences in this movie that have some of the worst wigs and mustaches I have ever seen. But man, was it distracting. Whew. Here's a more little maybe nitpick of a critique, but I can't help but say it. I don't like that when Hollywood does this thing where when black people are in a movie, especially if they're the lead, that all of a sudden the soundtrack has to have like hip hop or trap music in it. Look, this series has already been around for a long time, and it never had any of those sort of like hip hop songs in it, but now that Chris Rock is in it, they just have like 21 Savage on the soundtrack. I'm not going to say it's racist, but it definitely feels, it doesn't shine a good light on the people who made this movie of just being like, well, I mean, if there's black people in it, well, what do black people like? They love rap music. We should put a bunch of rap music in it. Anytime any of the rap music pops up in this movie, it is distracting, but the movie also does not make a commitment to have the hip hop stuff be plentiful throughout. It pretty much puts the hip hop stuff at the beginning of the movie, and then it just kind of uses generic but more in line with the Saw franchises like thriller horror-esque music, and then at the very end 21 Savage again. And some of you may be going, hey Najee, I don't care about any of that stuff about the Saw movies. All I care about are the cool traps that are in it, which I get it. This movie has some of the worst Saw traps I've seen in a film. None of them are particularly imaginative. And then also another failing on the movie is that the way they set up these traps, just how they edit it and whatnot, it just does not work. There's a certain way the Saw movies did these traps that really worked. It really, at least when Saw was at its best, it really leaned into the thriller mind game aspect of it. And this movie does not. This movie makes a terrible decision for the most part of having it where you already know whether the person got out of the trap before we even see how the trap played out, which just gets rid of all the tension within the scene. I'm going to really get into not necessarily the biggest flaw of this movie, but a huge anchor that is tied to this movie's leg. And but before I do that, if you like this review, then just give it a like, just physically give it a like. And also make sure, to subscribe to the channel. Now I'm going to really get into one of the worst aspects of this film. The main actor, Chris Rock, apparently this was a passion project of his. The part of the reason why the Saw franchise even got revived is because Chris Rock pushed for it so hard, and he's also starring in the movie. First of all, I don't know why he wanted this one. I mean, don't get me wrong, black people like horror movies, but I'm just surprised that this is the thing he wanted to attach his name to. Now, some of what I think brought him to this is that I think Chris Rock has been wanting to get into more serious Chris Rock is miscast as the lead detective in this movie. He first, physically, Chris Rock is not really a physically intimidating guy. And there are various points in this movie where I'm supposed to buy him as like a rugged detective guy. And I just don't buy him as that. And his acting is bad in this movie. There's no subtext to his performance. Don't get me wrong. No one comes out of this movie looking good. Like Samuel Jackson's in this movie. He doesn't come out looking particularly good either. But Chris Rock, I just don't think he's good at dramatic acting, okay? There's a lot of times in this movie where his performance feels like he is doing what he thinks he needs to do in terms of playing a dark, moody detective. But his facial expressions are so distracting. You'll have a moment where someone gets killed and he comes and looks at the body, and his facial expression will be something like I'm not exaggerating. Or let's say his character's upset about something. His character's facial expression is... And it's so distracting. I even tried to give him benefit of the doubt, right? Where I went, okay, maybe it's just this movie. So I went and watched some of Fargo season 4, which he's in. Which, don't get me wrong, his performance is the distracting bad aspect of his performance that I saw in this movie are definitely lessened in that show. But I still noticed that when it came to certain facial stuff in terms of his acting, he still sometimes overdoes his facial expression. He doesn't really seem to understand how to do subtlety. And yeah, I just think that with him being the main character and so much of the movie focused around him, it does not help when that main focus is constantly undermining your movie, especially in a movie that has nothing else holding it up. And to be real, it is sad to see where the Saw franchise has gone. So, in conclusion, this movie is terrible. Don't watch this movie. This movie is not even bad enough. It's not even like the bad, funny kind of movie. It's just bad. So, with that, I'm going to say if you're feeling a hankering to watch this movie, just go watch one of the other Saws. Even the other past Saws. I didn't even like the last Saw movie they did before this, but you're better off watching that movie than this movie. And so with that, and I know a lot of my friends are finally glad that I'm doing this, I'm going to give Spiral a 1 out of 10. There is nothing redeeming about this movie. This movie is bad. This is one of the worst that I've seen in a while. In a while. So, if you have seen this movie, please leave a comment down below. Please, because it's almost hard for me to believe how bad this movie is, especially with a talent like Chris Rock attached to it. So please leave your comments down below and I will respond to you because I can't be alone in the misery of this film. So until then, I will talk to y'all later. Bye.